said previously, my name is Piotr Januszek. But before we go into who am I, let's first start with a story some of you actually might be familiar with. So basically, let's say we've got a simple e-commerce website. Something like, you go on, you buy some products, you check out, they get delivered to you. Imagine what you need to do is just add one simple, teeny tiny checkbox to that saying the delivery address and billing address are basically going to be the same. In theory, sounds like a super easy, super fast task, but in practice, it takes you a lot of time to actually implement that. Nearly 2 weeks, all the team needs to work. Some on the front end need to tweak the page, some on the back end have some problems, and in the end, you actually cause an additional regression because apparently for some unknown reason, the coupons don't work for free delivery. So question is, what could have happened here? What is going on? Product or management or whatever just goes to you and asks, okay, why is it taking so long for this simple, in theory, change? And the answer is usually very typical. It's not that people don't know their system. It's not like they don't know what they're doing. It's basically the problem of technical debt. So who am I, or why might it be worth to listen to me? I've been in IT for over 12 years, started off as a developer, went through QA, up to right now I'm an engineering manager for the company called Egnyte. And right now I am managing several teams, development teams working on the same product. And for the context of the presentation, a very quick information. What is Egnyte? We're basically a B2B company focusing on our own product. And the important thing in here, we've been working with this, our own same product for over 12 years. So there's a lot of places that things can actually go wrong or where you have to rush things. So overall, we've got a very big scale, very high customizability, which causes a lot of potential interesting situations. But okay, let's get back to the topic, technical debt. Is this something that's actually a problem? And I'm pretty sure everyone here will be let's say, agreeing that this is something that causes you trouble, this is something that makes the development so much slower, it's something that causes potential regressions, and it just makes everyone's life very miserable because it's just unpleasant and troublesome to get through that. So the question would be, why do we have it? Is it necessary to have it? And the sad truth is, or even not maybe the sad truth, but the truth is it's not something where you have to start running around and just run away screaming, oh my God, there's technical debt in here. It's something that's inevitable. If your product will live for a longer time, there will be decisions, architectural decisions that have been well at the time they were being done, but with time the product has shifted a little bit, the goals of the business have shifted a little bit, or basically the technology is moving forward. And you need to adjust to make sure all of that actually is still working. So imagine, for example, you want to buy a home or start your own business. You just go and take a loan from the bank, which makes sense. But then you have to pay the bank off. You have to pay the interest. And I think this is a very similar situation where you have to start paying the interest at all time, because if not, it's just going to pile up on top of each other, and it actually piles up pretty quickly to the point where you actually say, okay, at this point, it just makes no sense to continue with that because any kind of change takes a lot of time. We have to start all over from the beginning. So the truth is we have to work on technical debt, and that's the key takeaway here. We just need to take care of that. So one of the basic methods, and something I would very highly suggest, is working on the so-called scout rule. What does it mean? At every time when you start working in any functionality or in any part of the code, you just make small refactorings, make small changes just to make the code a little bit better. Why is that? Because in all of the books of like self-improvement, stuff like that, there is a saying, if every day you become just 1% better at who you are, at the end of the year, you're going to be over 5 times better altogether. Imagine taking that to your product, to your code. If you start working with that, and every time you touch a functionality, it's going to be better, at the end of year or even several years, you're going to be working with a completely different, much, much better, much more versatile product. So the good thing from here is this actually works, and I highly suggest if one thing as an outcome of this is start doing that. If you haven't, if you are, continue doing that. But it's not a silver bullet. It won't work every time, because this is something great to maintain your code, to make sure it's always at the good state. But what happens if you've got larger projects? Say, I don't know, let's say you've started with a monolithic application and you want to cut it to services. Or let's say you've got a Python project and want to migrate from Python 2 to Python 3 on a very high complexity. So all of these things are something you can't just do on the side. You can't just say, okay, I'm just going to do it in the meantime. These are larger projects that you have to, let's say, plan on, you have to actually do. So in order to do that, how can we do? We already know we maintain the scout rule, but how do we move further for the large projects? And the truth is, you probably will find such a project very quickly. And the first thing I would suggest to do is not go directly into coding. The reason for that is, at work, we're working for a business, so all we want to do is get as much value from our work as possible. And in order to do that, identify all the places that you have inside of your projects, all the places that are worth doing, because I'm pretty sure there's this one place in your code that's just bugging you so much and you really want to make sure that it's different. But if there won't be any change in there for several years, then is it really worth doing it at this moment? There might be a point later in time where it will be worth it, but maybe now is not the time. So make sure you talk to your product, make sure you know what's the strategy of your project. How do you want to approach, how do you want to move faster, how do you want to move further, and also always make sure that you identify the places where your system, for example, might not scale, might have problems, or maybe has some additional bugs, because unfortunately bugs are social creatures. If you find one, there's probably plenty around. All of these places, if you find them out, you can then make a plan. How do you want to tackle that? But also don't spend too much time on the plan. If you spend a year, create a 20-year plan for fixing your great product, it just won't make any sense. Because truth is, you're going to finish 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4, and then suddenly you're in a completely different completely different place. So the product moved on, your code base moved on, you might have fixed some of them are invalid. So always make sure you have a plan for the one you want to go for, the next one, maybe one additional, but don't waste a lot of time on planning. Just make sure you have that and make sure everyone understands why are these things actually really important to focus on. Why is it worth doing these projects, not the others? Because if you've got everyone on your side, it's just going to be so much easier working on that. So, okay, we've talked a little bit about what, we've talked a little bit about when. Let's talk about how. So basically what we had, and again, as I said, I've been managing several teams. Each of these teams actually tried a different approach for solving technical debt. And these 3 are the ones I wanted to share with all of you. All of them have their pros and cons. So let's start with the first one. It's, let's say, solving technical debt as part of an ongoing development. So in our case, we're working on sprints. So this is basically the consistency of the sprint as it is. Let's say 100% is the whole sprint. And we just packed 70% of the sprint with business value, with features, with really important things that we know are necessary for the business in order to move forward. 30%, on the other hand, are things that we know ourselves. These are the important part. These are the refactorings that we need. These are the changes on the technical side that will actually bring us to the next level. And when it comes to this approach, some of the things that are very important, worth mentioning, like really good parts, is first of all, the whole team really focuses on making sure that the technical debt is being worked on. There is no, okay, I'm just going to finish this earlier and someone else is going to take care of that. Everyone is always participating for that. Everyone makes sure that whatever we do, we always tackle some of the technical debt, we always resolve that, and there is a very good transparency. And speaking of transparency, we've got we basically have a very good transparency because we take these as part of our sprint. Everyone is aware what kind of tasks we're doing, what are the goals of them, what will we gain at the end when the sprint is being finished, and having a very clear view of what's going on is extremely important maintaining long time, because it's very easy to start working, say, okay, I will be doing technical debt right now. It's a little harder when after a month there's a higher pressure on features and you need to start, let's say, making sure it's still being worked on. Unfortunately, this also has some drawbacks. And first of all, it's the points are being burned top down. What do I mean by that? Let's go back to our previous image. So if you look at that, mostly what things are happening is we start at the top with the business value, we go through the business value, and then we start working with technical debt, making sure that then after all of the business value is done, we, let's say, work on the technical parts. And as probably some of you have already see what might be the problem, if you don't finish your sprint completely, if there's something that will be left outstanding, it's most likely going to be the technical parts. So then you start to negotiate, okay, do we start with technical debt next sprint first and then move towards feature, or how do we count the points, and so on and so forth. It's just a big mess if that happens, and it just has a very bad consequence. And also, when it comes to that, it's not a very good approach when it comes to let's say very large projects. Because imagine if you've got a project spanning through 4 months, and then suddenly you need to switch context, or you just jump onto the let's say next thing. You will be, or if you don't finish your sprint, you're just gonna have a problem, because if from 30% you actually go down to 15, your 4 months become 8, and most of all, it takes a really big hit when it comes to morale for the developers, for the engineers, because suddenly they're like, okay, in theory I'm doing something, but it just is taking so much time. I see no value, I see no gains when it comes to my system. So this is a very hard, let's say, hard approach to maintain. Also, there might be a little additional problem if the team starts to get a little, let's say, overly creative, saying, okay, so I'm just going to take these story points for the feature, I'm going to reduce it from, let's take it up from 8 to 13, so this technical debt feature is going to be not a 5, but 1, so we just, let's say, move or shift the points, but that causes a great problem, because then we start losing trust to each other, and we need to work as one team towards one common goal, right? We need to deliver the best value that we can. So that'd be that when it comes to the first approach. The second one is actually making sure we've got dedicated time towards solving a technical debt. And again, in our case, we're working in sprints. So the way we've divided that was 3 business value sprints, and then 1 technical debt dedicated sprint, then 3 business value sprints, then 1 technical debt dedicated sprint. So how did that work out? When it comes to the good parts, it's actually so good at introducing new technologies or new approaches to the team, it's very hard to grasp it. Because, for example, in our case, what we did with that, we took our front-end dedicated team, and we actually, let's say, introduced React to our front-end. And the amount of let's say, of willing to learn this, to implement this, was so big that everyone was really excited. We get to experiment a little, find the best approach, not just rush forward because we need to do it as soon as possible, but everyone feels we've got enough time to actually make sure that this is the good approach. Additionally, later when we started working on the business-facing sprints, we could have actually leveraged everything that we used to do that, and then continue introducing the technology further. So that's definitely good part. And from that, you probably can see that the large projects can actually get done much quicker, because you just tackle it, you swarm it with everyone that can, that is available in the team, and they really get done fast. You can really see the return of investment very, very quickly. But unfortunately, when it comes to having full dedicated technical debt sprint, is there even something like that? Because what probably will happen is, especially working with Agile, you will have a problem like, okay, we need to do these additional refinements because we need to think about what we're doing next. We need to do something. And by the way, there's this customer, very small thing. We just need to add one little thing. And if you're going to do that, then we're going to leave everything at that. And the team, again, feels like, okay, in theory, we were waiting for that. We need to switch context. We waste a lot of time. And it's just very demotivating for them, because finally they get to do that, but unfortunately they even can't focus as much as they wanted. And additionally, what I said, it's good for big projects. It's not the best approach for very large projects, because as you can imagine, let's say you finished 80% of the project or 50%, then you need to wait 3 additional sprints in order to continue that. Or you start negotiating and then you actually shift towards the first approach, because then you start, let's say, having both in one sprint. So unfortunately, these are some of the potential problems that can appear with that approach. So that's why the third team actually tried doing it in a completely different way, which is extracting people at the beginning, like from 5 people, 1 person was dealing with technical debt, and then it quickly, let's say, drifted in the direction of having 3 dedicated feature teams and 1 dedicated technical debt team. And one thing to also remember, we're still maintaining the scout rule. It's not like these are the only people doing anything. We also are doing the refactoring as we go. So what are the bonuses or good parts of this approach? First of all, it's super easy to make sure that people focusing on technical debt are actually focused on technical debt. Even if someone comes to you and says, you know, there's this super important thing, well, you've got other teams that are actually willing to do that because their time is dedicated especially for that. They are supposed to, let's say, deliver as much business value as possible, and it's fair because that's what, you know, that's what product is supposed to do, prioritize everything against each other. Additionally, this team will very quickly become a team of very experienced people. Why is that? Because technical debt is all over the place. You need to identify it. You need to look for all the things. And then whenever you fix that, you actually find a lot of potential other places to be able to fix. But unfortunately, it's not a, let's say, it's not a silver bullet yet again, because it might happen. It didn't happen for us, luckily, but it might happen at some point that everyone just becomes, okay, I'm just doing my feature. I don't care about anything else. I'm just going to deliver it very quickly, and it's their problem. It's not my problem. We have a team dedicated to these kind of things. So make sure it doesn't happen. The scout rule is super important, especially in this case, because everyone needs to be aware and everyone needs to understand. Also increase the, let's say, visibility of that. Make sure you've got some kind of meetings or explainings. What is the team working on and why are we working on these kind of things? The second drawback, I would say it's got like 2 different poles, because depending on the projects you'll be doing, like for example, if you're splitting any monolithic application into microservices, you're going to have every backend developer willing to do that. I'm pretty sure everyone will be like, yeah, I want to do that. Pick me. On the other hand, if you've got something like, I don't know, update libraries from a very old version to something newer, it's going to be like, well, you know, someone needs to do that, but why me? There's lots of other people that might be interested in that. But unfortunately, it might happen that not a lot of them will actually want to do these kind of things. So, truth is, in the end, and we've been doing, let's say, these on and off and different experiments for over a year, what we have right now is we all went with the last approach, so basically dedicated people working, but rather than having dedicated people from each team, we actually separated the team, so we've got 3 teams focusing mostly on features and 1 team focusing mostly on technical debt, but everyone is working as, let's say, improving on the go. So, of course, scout rule is always in place. Every team is always making sure that the code base is better, because long term it's going to give you tremendous gains. We've got 4 backend developers and 1 to 2 front-end developers working on the technical debt. And the reason for that is because that actually gives us a lot of possibilities to actually make the system better. It's not like we're thinking, okay, at some point it's going to be useful. We already have several projects that are either finished or ongoing, like splitting completely our UI deployment from our backend and splitting these 2, like making sure they're completely 2 different applications, or updating some of the core libraries that have been neglected for quite some time. So all of these things actually have happened, and we're actually moving forward with additional projects, like, again, splitting a more, let's say, more distributed monolithic application into specific services. So all of these things are happening, and not only they're happening, they're ongoing. One of the key things I would suggest in here is make sure people inside this team actually get to rotate. So they have the possibility of joining the team, and then after finishing a project or two, they get to say whether they want to stay or not, because working with technical debt can be extremely tiring, I would say. This is usually the code that you don't really understand. It's very convoluted. You jump from one place to another and various spaces. So make sure you do that with the additional benefit of rotating, because as said earlier, these people will very soon start understanding the system in a much better complexity than all other people, because they jump and walk around the places. So in the end, you get all of that expertise, and then you spread it all together, all through the system, so you actually get a lot of value from that. We've got 4 ongoing projects right now with the amount of people, so it makes sense. Some are pairing, some are moving just forward, let's say pushing things on their own. And first of all, and last of all, our team working with technical debt is also, let's say, working with something called customer escalations. What is that? So basically, whenever a customer has a problem, they call support, but if this is actually a bug, and I'm not saying like a typical normal bug, it's usually a very difficult edge case. As I said, platform is very configurable. They are the ones that actually swoop in and fix the things. And due to that, they get a much better understanding which places actually are worth doing, in which places we actually have much more value because they're more error prone, or they're weird, or just not completely ununderstandable. So that actually gives you a very comprehensive team of people really understanding the complexity of the system. So there are some additional, let's say, things worth mentioning altogether. First of all, get some quick wins, and by that I mean don't only think about the long-term big projects that after you finish them in 5 years you're gonna have so much value, because at some point it might happen that someone will come to you and say, okay, you've been doing something for half a year, there is absolutely no value in that, no one can see that, so let's just kill off the project and move forward with things that can bring you value, like, I know, in a measurable amount of time, because at this point you're just tinkering and nothing is there. So again, talk to your product, make sure you understand what things will actually give you the value immediately or short term, and also plan for things long term. Always have a plan, a mixture of both of these, because the long term gives you a value in the end, and it probably will give you much more value, but you also need to maintain some constant flow of improvements throughout the whole system. And also it's very important for the morale of people as well, because from this perspective, if you start working on something, you just get inside of it for I don't know, several months, and you can see that there's also several months in front of you nothing is moving, then we'll just get tired as well. Second thing, identify your technical debt, because I'm pretty sure it will happen to you that product will come to you and say, okay, so I've got this cool technical debt project, so basically this feature needs to be there. And it's like, it's not technical debt, it's a feature. We have different people dedicated for that, or we've got different amount of time dedicated for that. So make sure there's a very common understanding. What's technical debt, what's not technical debt. And in order with that, you'll be much easier to run these projects to make sure that they actually move forward very quickly. And the last worth mention is actually fight for your time, because I'm pretty sure what will happen is they will come to you and say, a super important thing, as soon as possible, we need to do this. This is the biggest value we've ever had. But this is the moment where you can't budge. You have to say, okay, we had an arrangement, we had a deal, this is how we're moving that. You've got people, you've got time that's dedicated for that. It's your work to prioritize all of that. Make sure we have the highest value. If this is great, I'm very happy you identified the best value we can have. These are the people that can do that for you. And in the end, this is something that will work for you. It has worked for us. We've got these people that are dedicated to that, and they're not being, let's say, swamped with other tasks. So altogether, the main takeaways as a summary of that, make sure that you always maintain the scout rule. This is the most important thing. If anything, if you don't have any time, if you feel like you won't be able to do anything else, scout rule is the thing to go. It's really going to be the biggest gain you will have altogether. Don't start coding immediately. Make sure you've got a proper plan. Make sure you always know what's going on and what's the biggest value you can get. Because in the end, if everyone will agree, yeah, I mean, if our system won't scale in a year, then we won't be able to do. There is no amount of features that can help a system that doesn't work. That's basically the outcome. Talk to your product, make sure you're always in sync, make sure you know what are the next things coming, so you always fix the right things, not the thing that you think might be important. Make sure you always have some kind of immediate gains as well as long-term gains, because it will really help you make sure that everything, that you get a constant flow of fixes. And choose your strategy, the strategy that I've said, the dedicated teams. This is something that works for us, but it doesn't mean that it's the ultimate silver bullet solution for everyone. I think that every one of you knows your company best, so you will be able to identify which of these approaches will just fit the style of your company altogether. And most of all, please never stop working with technical debt, because in the end, this is, we're engineers, we're people that really understand the system, and everyone is trying to do the best according to their knowledge. If we don't communicate, if we don't say there are these problems, this is the let's say the consequence of not doing that, this is the outcome, the gain that we can have. If we explain all of that, I'm pretty sure everyone will be reasonable and they will say, okay, so let's focus on that, let's prioritize that, or let's just start working on that immediately, because if the system won't be able to work, then obviously nothing will be okay. So that'd be it when it comes to me. Does anyone have any kind of questions regarding that? Yeah. Okay, so that's a very good question. The question is, how can you change the mindset within the leadership to make sure that we can work with technical debt? The truth is, you just have to explain and reason. You have to have arguments. It's not like you can go and say, I just want to do that because it's important. They need to understand that. And again, I know it's not easy. It's not something that you can do out of the, let's say, on the fly. It's something that you need to prepare with, show them what are the consequences of not doing something, show them what can you actually gain. And, it's always about probably what the business always wants is how can we move faster and how can we deliver more. So if this is something that you can show, if we don't do that, we're going to slow down X amount of time because it won't be possible. Or the system will be much more error prone. We anticipate that we can have 20% more problems on production or things like that. This is the language they will be understanding, and this is the language that worked in our case. If you start explaining to them what will be the consequence for the production environment, this is what really, let's say, works on the management. Thanks. Yes?
So you said you had 3 teams for features and 1 play technical debt. So does it mean that on average you spend something like 25% on
This is the rough, let's say, amount. What we try to do is we get between 25 and 30% of people's time focusing on technical debt, because we already see that, first of all, it starts giving off a really nice benefits long term. And again, as I said, if you combine the shorter and longer term, they will actually start understanding, okay, we're actually getting much more value from that than we initially thought. And this is one of the things that's also very important. If you start with the quicker wins, they will be much more, let's say, willing to start longer projects, because they will start seeing a lot of additional value that they can come either with, I don't know, system speed or less errors or things like that. So yeah, we've got around 25-30%. Something like that, yeah, a little over. It has changed its, let's say, scope a few times, but overall the core is indeed 12 years old.
How long have you been doing this approach?
Around a year and a half now.
And it's working for us. This is the best approach for you.
At this point, I think that it gives the best return on all of that. And again, we started experimenting, and we did experimenting, let's say, for the first half up to a year. And we've had various results. Some of them really worked well, some of them worked much worse. Some of them worked for time and then they stopped working because, for example, in case of technical debts, the first technical debt happened, the second happened, the third one never happened. So it's a little bit of a tricky situation, but overall this approach seems to be working in a way that we do have people dedicated for that. They are doing the projects and they are finishing the projects.
So after this 1.5 year, do you have in mind next steps, plan?
Yes, we are planning. Every time we finish a project, we just talk about what's the next thing. And also it's important to get all of the developers involved in the strategic way of advancing the project, not just the technical dev team, because it influences everyone.
So what is the plan? Do you think it will change, this 25%, or will it stay on many years?
At this point, I think that for the next maybe couple of years, we will maintain the velocity, the speed that we have right now. And then later, probably, we'll be reinvesting, re-identifying whether we still need that much work on the technical depth or whether we can shift more towards product. But again, it's something... you can't really plan technical depth very easily. You can do some of that, but it's impossible to say, I know that after 2 years something's going to happen, because let's say there will be changes on the libraries, there will be changes on, I don't know, on the scalability, the system will grow. All of these things will have their own influence. Okay, thanks. Was there another question there?